Hello, I'm Riccardo Sai, a photographer, director, and producer. I'm here with Beverly Glick, who is a written and spoken word coach. And Beverly, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Thanks, Riccardo. Yes, so spoken and written word. I basically play in the world of words. So my background is in journalism. I've been a journalist for nearly 40 years, and I figured out recently that I've had nearly 2 million words published in magazines and newspapers over the years. So that's my playground. I also play in the spoken word. I'm a public speaking coach and trainer as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Beverly. So today's subject of an espresso with Riccardo Sai, it's the origin story, which is a very interesting subject, and I can't wait to learn more about this. So first of all, Beverly, so what's an origin story? And yeah, why don't we start from there? What is it?
So an origin story, you can think of it like your founding myth. It's your little mythology, if you like. So an origin story, it tells the story of where it all began for you, whether it's for you personally in your life, whether it's for you in your company or your business, and you trace right back to the roots of when it started, and then you tell the story of how you then ended up where you are today. That's it in its simplest terms. But there's more to it than that, because to make it a story, to make it a proper rounded story, you have to have this sense of journey within it. There's no point in saying, oh yeah, my name's Riccardo. I was always interested in cameras from when I was a little boy, and now I'm a photographer and it's great. That's not enough. So what's missing from that? What's missing from that is the journey, and the journey you took from those first moments then you were first interested in cameras, and telling the story of how you got from that point to becoming a professional filmmaker and photographer. Now, I'm not going to ask you to tell me that story today, but what needs to go in the bulk of that story is the journey, which means what are the challenges you face. There's got to be some kind of sense of the obstacles you overcame to get where you are today. So that's what makes a good origin story.
Wow, so that's really definitely a lot of tips that I can use to write my own origin story. Thank you, Beverly. So why is it important to tell your own origin story? I mean, as an entrepreneur, as a brand, as an organization. So why is it so important, do you think?
I think one of the reasons that an origin story is so important, whoever you are, is it kind of roots you in a sense of why you're doing what you're doing right now. You know, where you came from, what the journey was. It helps you reflect on what motivates you, why you're doing what you're doing now, what the journey was, what you've learned along the way. And it usually demonstrates your values, your mission, your purpose. So I think for all of those reasons, it's important to have clarity around your origin story.
Thank you so much. And how do we use origin story? And how can we? What do we? Once we have an origin story, and how do we use it on your origin story? What do we make of that?
So I think there are various ways in which you can use an origin story. You can use them on an About Me page on your website. You can use them on a LinkedIn profile. You can use it as the inspiration for a blog post or a video. There's lots of ways in which you can use it to tell people more about who you are, really. It's about allowing other people to find themselves in your story. Because as I explained in the previous conversation, it's about the way that we create connection with other people is by sharing our stories. And even if they haven't had the exact experiences that we have, they're usually imagining something similar in their lives. So it lets people find themselves in your story, and that's one of the, I think, most important parts of that origin story. And I think sometimes people don't quite know where to start with their origin story. So I've got some kind of broad guidelines that I can share with you so that people can locate themselves in terms of where to start.
Absolutely. I'd love to know more about how to tell my own story, because that's very useful. But before we do that, Beverly, I wanted to ask you something. So this is a great concept, really fascinating and really useful, I think, especially for startups, but not only for startups. We last time we spoke, you were telling me about some really kind of a large company origin story. So have you got some like famous company origin stories, so we can really understand more what it is?
Yes, absolutely. And really, it's the only way to figure out how to tell your own origin story is by listening to other people's origin stories. So one of my favorite origin stories, which I found a few years ago on a video, is the story of how Richard Branson started Virgin Atlantic. And most of this is from his own words on this video. And it's just a charming story, but it says a lot about him and who he is, which is always helpful. So this is what he said. So I was in Puerto Rico trying to get to the British Virgin Islands. The airline didn't have enough passengers to warrant a flight, so they cancelled it. Now, I had a beautiful lady waiting for me in the British Virgin Islands, so I hired a plane and borrowed a blackboard. As a joke, I wrote Virgin Airlines on the top, $39 one way to the British Virgin Islands. Then I went round all the passengers who'd been bumped off the flight and I filled up my first plane. So that's the beginning of the story. Now he goes on. When I got there to the British Virgin Islands, I started thinking, now a lot of airlines do bump you. In those days, they didn't care about people at all. I was in the entertainment world and I thought, damn it, we can do better than this. So I rang up Boeing, said I was in the record business and asked if they had any second-hand 747s. Surprisingly, they didn't put the phone down on me. So I ended up getting our first 747 and we made it that much more special than all the other airlines. And I think the only way a small company can survive against bigger companies is to be a lot better and to innovate. So that's his origin story. Completely true. I can just imagine him. It just says so much about his character that he didn't feel like there was any obstacle in just phoning up Boeing and getting a second-hand plane. So that's very much demonstrating his entrepreneurial attitude. I just love that story.
That's really, really great. Fantastic and funny as well. I think that's yeah. So, and what about any other stories that you have in mind? Any other origin stories?
Yeah, I found this one the other day, and it's very short and simple, but I really liked it. So everyone's heard of Penguin Books, right? So they've got one of the most famous logos ever created, which is the famous dancing penguin. So the origin of that famous brand goes right back to 1934, when the young publisher by the name of Alan Lane, he found himself waiting for a train at Exeter St David's, and he was scouring the station bookstore for something to read. So what he found was either overpriced or mediocre, wasn't interested in what was there. So he sensed a gap in the market for a more affordable but high quality alternative. So he and his brothers got to work. Now, they'd already discussed using an animal for their logo, but it wasn't until a typist suggested a penguin as a dignified but flippant image that Lane decided on the penguin. He fell in love with the idea. He sent his designer to London Zoo, and so it was that the dancing penguin finally emerged and again became one of the most famous brand logos that has ever been created.
That's fantastic. That's another great story as well. So, okay, these are great examples. But so I've got a startup. I'm literally starting up. I've got some investment. So one of the first things that I want to use is my origin story. So how can I tell my origin story? So how do we start? Can you give us some tips?
So I'm going to do, no, it's not exactly a structure. So just think of it as a very, very basic bare bones framework. So it's not going to fit everything, but I'm going to give you some guidelines to just get you thinking about how to access your origin story. So the first thing to think about is when you're thinking about it, it depends on whether if it's a brand or is it a company or is it just you as an individual. Depends on the project that you're promoting, of course. So you can either think of it as where did it start? So when did I first start thinking about this project, company, brand? Or another way to think of it is, well, it used to be like this. So like in Richard Branson's example, it used to be that you used to get bumped off airlines. So he was kind of solving a problem. So sometimes it's a problem that you're solving. So think about that question. So it used to be like this. And then maybe you thought, I can do it differently. Or I have a different way of doing this that's very unique to me. Or I'm answering a need. So what did it used to be like before you had this idea? Then the key to making it a great story is the difficulties that you faced between that point and the end point. So the end point is, and that's how this came to be. So that's how I came to launch my company or this project, or I came to write this book or whatever it is. So the key piece is, what are the difficulties you faced between those 2 points? Now, they might not have felt like difficulty. They might have felt like difficulties at the time, or in hindsight, you have to kind of trace your path to think, okay, so what obstacles did I overcome? It might have been financial, it might have been in partnerships or finding the right collaborators, or it might just have been in, what did you have to do to get this thing off the ground? That's never plain sailing, right? There's always going to be obstacles that you face, and that's the part of the story that people really hook into. That's where they can identify with you, and that's your opportunity to demonstrate some of your values, your qualities. So that's a very simple framework, just to get you thinking about where to start, where to finish. You know where it finishes, right? It's more where it starts and how you then tell the story.
Wow, that's been a very interesting story. Thank you. And so, Beverly, thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I hope also other people will benefit from this video podcast. And I can't wait to start writing my own origin story. And also, we had a conversation before we started recording this video, and also you told me that one thing is your origin story, and the other thing is your brand story. So what's the difference between the two? I mean, can an origin story change, or is it always the same? So I'd like to pick your brain on that.
So I would say with an origin story, that's usually set in stone. You can probably tell it slightly differently, but there's usually only one origin story. So the difference between that and a brand story is that a brand story is always evolving. So a brand is always evolving. So if you look at any of the most successful brands, if you look at what story they were telling 5 years ago, it's going to be very different to the story they're telling today. So I saw a really good example today, actually, which was McDonald's. So when the pandemic hit and social distancing started, they came out with a version of their M logo that was kind of separated. So they took the two halves of the logo and pulled them apart to just demonstrate the fact that they were really thinking about the social distancing aspect of it. So a brand will evolve in that way. So that's the difference.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Beverly. Lots to take on, I think. So I need to rewatch again this video and take some notes.
Thanks.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.